have sworn I left a book up here.
The book, reading the big one.
No, it's, why can you do that one with so many numbers in there?
Oh.
It's okay.
Numbers in the book.
I know, it's too big for me. All right, 392. Beautiful song. Let the beauty of, is that it? Would you, did you take it from me? All right. Shall we sing? Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me, all His wonderful passion and purity. May His Spirit divine all my being refine. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. When your burden is heavy and hard to bear, when your neighbors refuse all your load to share, when your feelings so blue, don't know just what to do, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. When somebody has been so unkind to you, some words spoken that pierces you through and through, think how He was beguiled, spat upon and reviled. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. From the dawn of the morning to close of day, in example, in deeds, and in all you say, lay your gifts at His feet, ever strive to keep sweet. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. Number 9, the song for the Lord's Supper. I don't think there's anybody here. I think everybody who was here this morning is here tonight, except for the people who aren't here. All right. Well, who'll sing the song? Who'll sing the song anyway? All right. All right. Shall we sing? A wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord, a wonderful Savior to me. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, where rivers of pleasure I see. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand. A wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord. He taketh my burden away. He holdeth me up, and I shall not be moved. He giveth me strength, that's my day. rapture, oh glory to God, for such a Redeemer as mine. He hides my soul in a cleft of the rock that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand. When clothed in His brightness, transported I rise to meet Him in clouds of the sky. His perfect salvation, His wonderful love, I'll shout with millions on high. He hides my soul in a cleft of the rock that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand. 499. Oh, to be like Thee. Shall we sing? Oh, to be like Thee, blessed Redeemer, this is my constant longing and prayer. Gladly I'll forfeit all of Thy treasures, Jesus, Thy perfect likeness to wear. Oh, to be like Thee, oh, to be like Thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as Thou art. Come in Thy sweetness, come in Thy fullness, stamp Thine own image deep on my heart. Oh, to be like Thee, full of compassion, loving, forgiving, tender and kind, helping the helpless, cheering the fainting, seeking the wandering sinner to find. Oh, to be like Thee, oh, to be like Thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as Thou art. Come in Thy sweetness, come in Thy fullness, stamp Thine own image deep on my heart. Oh, to be like Thee, lowly in spirit, holy and harmless, patient and brave, meekly enduring cruel reproaches, willing to suffer, others to save. Oh, to be like Thee, oh, to be like Thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as Thou art. Come in Thy sweetness, come in Thy fullness, stamp Thine own image deep on my heart. Oh, to be like Thee, Lord, I am coming, now to receive the anointing divine. All that I am and have I am bringing, Lord, from this moment all shall be Thine. Oh, to be like Thee, oh, to be like Thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as Thou art. Come in Thy Song after lesson would be 209.
All right, good evening. If you would open your Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes and chapter 7 specifically. Ecclesiastes 7. After going through a lot of my dad's things and still needing to go through some of his things, one of the things that I've known about my dad for a long time and then just was reiterated or confirmed as going through a number of his different things, that he was the kind of person who purchased a backup for the backup for the backup of something. And so that was some of our conversation actually just beforehand with Vicky and Dennis. We were talking about that. I said, well, this plays right into what we're talking about tonight. And everyone's still wondering, what does this have to do with what we're going to be talking about? It's almost like you just couldn't have, my dad just couldn't have enough things of something to make sure. He wanted to make sure that he was never without some things that he particularly wanted to make sure he had. So, for instance, readers. So I sent a basket full like this of readers home with my brother-in-law because he's like, oh yeah, I'm always misplacing my readers, or I'm always smashing them at work, or they're getting broken somehow or whatever, and I need to replace. I said, well, here's I did not take an exact count, but I would suggest there were probably maybe 40 readers that I sent with him. And then after that, I still was finding more. That's right, because you lose them, you misplace them, you want to have them at the ready. And it was just, the dollar store type readers is what he, would purchase. And he was happy and content with that, and always prided himself on being prepared. Can you ever have enough of a good thing? Yeah, that depends on maybe what we're talking about, does it? We talked about this a little bit in the high school class this morning about having too much in the way of sweets. And there's a proverb about that too, that speaks to that, about too much honey, and then you end up getting sick or something like that from having too much in the way of sweets, but a little bit is just great. And but we got to keep telling ourselves that too much of a good thing. And is there such thing as too little of a bad thing? Here's where I'm going with this. Look at Ecclesiastes 7. We run into different verses in Scripture that are a bit perplexing on some of the reasoning, or they either sound contradictory or conflicting, or that just doesn't seem to make any sense. Here's one of those, I think, challenging in a way, verses, because what is really going on here with what he's saying? So chapter 7 and verses 16 and 17, I think it's kind of a puzzling section of verses. Listen to it. It says, do not be excessively righteous, and do not be overly wise. Why should you ruin yourself? Do not be excessively wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp one thing and also let go of the other, for the one who fears God comes forth with both of them. All right. Do not be excessively righteous and overly wise. Well, no problem here. In fact, if you were to think of anything along those lines, what would fit into that picture of being too righteous. Is there ever such a thing for anyone? You're just too righteous. Like there's a certain full amount and you better not go over that because now your righteousness is just too much. I thought God wants us to be fully righteous like He is. And being like Him is significant. Is God righteous? Does He not want us to be righteous? So what gives here with this? And then the flip side of that being overly wicked. So what? Just mix in a little bit of righteousness, a little bit of wickedness, and then you got it good. You're balanced in life. Is that what He's going on about? How about even the notion of, let's think about the overdoing righteousness and perhaps being overly righteous or excessively righteous. Some people have suggested that might be kind of like the Pharisees in Jesus' day. And like in Matthew 23 and in verse 24, when Jesus addressed a problem actually about them straining out gnats and swallowing camels. And straining out a gnat, it's like, what is that? Going to such a great length to avoid eating something that's unclean. You're going to strain a gnat. All right, we got to make sure we're not eating something unclean. And then Jesus says, and then you go and swallow a camel. And so, metaphor, but kind of what he's suggesting they're doing. And then along those lines, he also talks about their tithing. The mint and the anise and cumin. And you tithe all of those things, and yet he says you neglect the weightier matters of the law. And so what Jesus is addressing, of course, were there Pharisees in Solomon's time, Ecclesiastes. And, well, not in name, but how about in concept? How about throughout the ages, people have been imbalanced in their approach along things in life. And in fact, we have in 2020, all of a sudden, there was a name that really came to the forefront for women. And for really just anybody, but it was Karen, right? and when I say that, you're like, oh yeah, I know who that is. That's that person who's just gonna, make sure that they're gonna just hound you for this is what's the right thing. They're gonna call you out. They're gonna nitpick. They're gonna whatever. And is that maybe the kind of thing that he's talking about? In their meticulous application of tithing, like the Pharisees, to every form of produce is what was going on. The Pharisees were so fixated on making sure that certain things were exactly what God was asking for. But I want you to notice too, there was also no more and no less in that approach. But let's make sure we're following it just to the T. Well, does God want us to be concerned about whether or not we're measuring up to what He wants us to be about? Should we be concerned about that? Sure we should. Sure. To understand these verses, we've got to understand some of the context of what is going on here. And as we see what's going on in Ecclesiastes contextually, then we start to get a little bit more of a grip on the reasoning and the logic, the proverbial approach that's taking place. Because remember the concept of Proverbs, which is what he's writing in proverbial form as he's seeking out wisdom and trying to weigh out and say, well, how does this measure out with our approach in life and what we're trying to seek after and accomplishing it? What is this life about? And Proverbs are general truths, right? So it's generally true that this is the case, but it's not going to be that exact thing in every single case. But it's for the majority of the time, it is true if you follow this principle type of a concept. And Ecclesiastes is really a search for what's going to make for a good life. And what really is the purpose of this life here under the sun. Now it explores the temporary life, and as we view and approach this temporary life, and when we approach it from a life under the sun kind of a mindset, a worldly mindset, things don't make sense when you reason them out from a worldly viewpoint, as opposed to a spiritually eternal viewpoint. If we look at things just from a temporary perspective versus an eternal perspective, we're going to get imbalanced. And this is part of where he's going with all this and how this is to be measured out. Let's go ahead and read some things in Ecclesiastes 7 and get a little bit more of the context. Let's just read the chapter here. Chapter 7, verse 1, a good name is better than a good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Well, that sounds pretty dark. And yeah, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. And so he's talking about some of this sober-mindedness in life and recognizing our frailty and that we're only here temporarily. And then verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. And so now here are some of the conundrums, or really to get to happiness, you also have to go through the sobriety of sadness of things, type of a thing. The mind, verse 4, of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. Well, can you hear the crackling laugh of a fool now? Every time you hear the crackling under a fire, there you go. And this too is futility. Verse 7, for oppression makes a wise man mad, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Now notice what he's bringing into the picture. Oppression, difficult times can cause even a wise person to really struggle to make sense of things. Now that's going to set some of the context now, as he's going to be addressing the way in which we handle facing difficulty. Do bad things only happen to bad people, and good things only happen to good people? Because that's kind of how a lot of people reason. We think it should go. Righteous people should be blessed, and wicked people should be cursed. Isn't that what God talked about in Deuteronomy? That's what he was going to do. But what happens when it doesn't play out that way? What happens when things seem to be and are unfair in life? And when my attempts at being righteous don't seem to bring about the kind of reward that they should be bringing. Or that when someone doing evil doesn't seem to have consequences like it should, and they're getting away with evil. So, hey, it didn't really bring any problem to me, so go ahead and have more evil, kind of a thing. It's kind of along the lines of what Paul talks about in Romans 6. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Now he's kind of flipping that and looking at that. It's still in the same kind of a reasoning. Verse 8, the end of a matter is better than its beginning. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? Anyone ever talk like that? Anyone feel that way? Boy, it was better when I was younger. Was it always? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Wisdom along with an inheritance is good and an advantage to those who see the sun. So now he's talking along the lines of some of the reasoning. Okay, so wisdom and inheritance. Like, okay, I've been the wise son or daughter or whatever. Now I've got this inheritance as a result of, just being the good and wise son. So it's kind of a reward that comes along with the doing of good concept that he's saying. But then he says, for wisdom, verse 12, is protection, just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. So now he's laying down some truths. Look at the beauty and the benefit and the blessings of wisdom. And it preserves and it protects. And same thing with having money. Do you not feel more secure when you're not in a lot of debt, where you actually have money to be able to buy the things that you need? Don't you feel secure? Yeah, that's what he's talking about, kind of a thing. Verse 13, though, now, he says, consider the work of God. For who is able to straighten what he has bent? Well, what's God doing bending things in the first place? It's kind of the whittling on God's end of the stick type of a thing, type of talk. Hey, God, when God does something, and you try and fix or do things for him, you find yourself in futility. And that's part of this whittling on God's end of the sticks, or trying to fix what God has bent, as though, that shouldn't be that way. I need to fix that. And God goes, what do you think you're doing? I'm the one who bent it. I want this to go this way for a specific reason. Be careful about trying to dabble too much in God's side of doing things. Verse 14, in the day of prosperity, be happy. But in the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. He goes, now God's just trying to confuse us or something. Now God shows that he is wiser, but notice what he says. He makes one and then the other as well as the other. Verse 18, or what he said, it is good for you to grasp one thing and also not let go of the other. For the one who fears God comes forth with both of them. Now notice where he's going with this. With this, one who fears God comes forth with God. Find ability. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his wickedness. There you go. So there's some context to what verses 16 and 17 are saying now. And look at that. The righteous man perishes in his righteousness. The wicked man prolongs his life in his wickedness. Cue the "that's not fair" statement. That's not fair. Now, because when we see that unfairness,
Well, look at what he goes on to say. In an attempt, okay, let's use verse 15 for a second. That's the bent part, right? That doesn't seem, we need to straighten that out. How can that be the case? So, he says, if you don't concern yourself in this area of trying to fix what God has bent by virtue of this. Well, maybe if I'm more righteous. This is kind of where he's going. Do not be excessively righteous. Do not be overly wise. Why should you ruin yourself? Do not be excessively wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp one thing and also not let go of the other, for the one who fears God comes forth with both of them. Wisdom strengthens a wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never sins. So listen to his recognition in verse 20 about a righteous, wise, good person. What does he do? How can we put it? He never not sins. In other words, he's considered righteous, he does good, but guess what? Even the righteous still manage to sin. And so he's trying to suggest that, listen, guess what? Even though we might count ourselves as righteous, do we sin? Yeah. Are we ever deserving of what we get for our sin? Only always. Can you ever consider yourself as only righteous and not someone who has sinned? I think he's trying to deal with that and address this kind of one-sided mentality that we might have about ourselves as he's talking about some of this. We want to see ourselves in concrete just one thing and not ever another. That's dangerous kind of thinking too. And recognize we are people with faults even though we seek to do things righteously. I tested verse 23. I tested all this with wisdom, and I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. What has been, anyone ever find themselves in that boat? I'm going to be smarter. I'm going to be wiser. And he says, it was far from me. What has been is remote and exceedingly mysterious. Who can discover it? Here's another exceedingly concept that he's talking about. I directed my mind to know, to investigate, and to seek wisdom and an explanation, and to know the evil of folly and the foolishness of madness. And I discovered more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are chains. And so now all of a sudden he goes off into talking about relational problems that he runs into. And he says, there's just so much here that pains us in this life. No matter how hard we try for it not to be bent, it ends up being bent in various ways. And no matter how hard we try to be wise and we try to be righteous, we find ourselves still lacking. Isn't that interesting for someone like Solomon to make such an evaluation of himself, who was gifted with more wisdom than anybody else, and all the other kings are coming to him and all that? I think to untangle some of these statements in verse 16 to 17, we see this context then. The author here, if it is Solomon, someone suggested it's like they've taken some of Solomon's things and then put them together and then inserted also some of their own reasoning and attempts at logic and at exploring life. Whatever it is, it starts off in the first couple of chapters, and we're just going to say Solomon for the sake of being able to make these arguments, because it starts off talking about Solomon with all this. He's tried everything. He's tried education. He's tried wealth. He's tried pleasure. He's tried food. He's tried labor and all kinds of things to satisfy him in this life. And he's found that none of these things really brought satisfaction. They never really brought long-term happiness. It was only temporary, short-lived. And even the value that he hoped to find in it, that he was really seeking after, really wasn't there, or at least not for any long period of time. And along the way, he learned a few other things besides that, such as the fact that wisdom is always the better path to follow. So this is a big part of his discussion. It's always the better path. And folly, on the other end of this, it only ruins things. So he's coming to that. But wisdom is a great benefit in life. And so he's trying to bring that to the forefront about approaching life. But then as we explore the wisdom stuff, there's things that don't seem to make sense. He admits that obtaining wisdom and following it are not going to keep you from harm. They're not going to keep you from hardship. They're not going to keep you from difficulty in life. In fact, sometimes life is completely the opposite of what we think that it would be. As we read in chapter 7, verse 15, where he says, there's the righteous man who perishes and the wicked man who prolongs life. It doesn't make sense. And the point is a simple one, that not even wisdom, which comes from God, is going to make life a bowl full of cherries, a bed of roses, or whatever phrase you want to throw in there. And so in this context, we find our statement then. And so the point of verse 16, as I think is going on here in context, is that the practice of righteousness, no matter how much you do it, is no guarantee or shield against pain, sorrow, problems, difficulty. To just illustrate it, I think it's well illustrated in the life of Jesus. No sin found in him, only righteous, and yet look at how he suffered. Right? That, to me, that is one of the significant go-to points when people do ask the question, like the family who lost their baby, and I told you I was talking with them, bringing up Jesus as a concept of why do bad things happen to good people, and trying to understand fairness, and that I do good in this life, why am I not rewarded more for it, or why am I suffering though I strive to be good and do good in this life. So, when you look at it, someone might say, then fine, I'll just live how I want to live. And I'm just going to indulge myself in things in this life and whatever I want to do so that I can maximize my happiness in life, if this is really how things are going to go. But this is where verse 17 now shifts gears and in effect says, no, that won't work either if you switch to the other side of things and go about doing evil. It's not going to make you happy either, even though temporarily it seems like it works. Indulging in sin is not going to make you happy. In fact, it's only going to hasten your demise. And so what Solomon's doing here is to try and create some clarity that these verses are not about how much righteousness or wickedness is enough. That's not the point. It's not about how much is too much, and if there's such a thing as too much righteousness, which, holier than thou, hey, you're too righteous. Your righteousness is sort of like being rubbed in my face. And maybe there's that to some of that approach too. But it's also about pursuit. What is it you're really pursuing? Are you pursuing like righteousness for righteousness' sake? Kind of like the Pharisees, where it was like, well, we just need to be exact about it and just be as righteous can be. And without really pursuing what the righteousness is about in the first place? Or is it more like, what was the word I was going to use? Yeah. The word just totally escaped me. Anyway, let me move on. Whatever that word was that just escaped me. But if you're looking for a way that is going to make you happy on a physical level, which is a lot of what he's trying to address every day, that's going to allow you to avoid the rough times and the hardships of life, then neither one of these routes is going to get you there. And that's a lot of where he's going. And it starts to sound, this is where Ecclesiastes can start to sound like a depressing message, because it's like, wow, well, that's pointless, and so why this and why that? And that seems to be pointless, and is it really a point to all of what we're trying to do? Because it almost seems like I'm spinning my wheels and it's not working out. These verses really are for us to see something in contrast of the physical versus the spiritual. That well, at the end of Ecclesiastes, it brings us around to this. Look at the end of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12. If you're, and we'll read that in just a second. If your physical comfort and if your worldly happiness are of primary importance to you, and if you only think that God always and only rewards a person's righteousness with material blessings, then guess what? You're going to find yourself sorely disappointed in this life. Try to make sense of why Andrew, the apostle, was it Andrew? Which one was it who was beheaded? James being beheaded. Well, that seems a little bit too early in the game. They still have to get the gospel out to the world. Jesus picked these men to be the ones to get the gospel out to the world. Shouldn't God be placing this hedge of protection around them and not letting anything happen to them whatsoever? What was it he said to Paul? You're going to suffer for my name's sake. What was it Jesus said to his apostles in the Beatitudes? Blessed are you when you suffer for my name's sake. And guess what? People are going to be after your life. And they were after, just like they were after Jesus' life. And eventually it ended Jesus' life. Eventually it ended the lives of the various apostles in suffering and all of that. So much for righteousness, huh? Well, see, this is where the temporary, like you're thinking this should prolong in your earthly life, while the proverbial concept is do right things and your life will find preservation on this earth. That's generally true. It's like, looking both ways before crossing the street versus not. Are you going to live longer days? Chances are you're going to live longer days if you look both ways. Versus like, hey, who cares? I'm running out there. Drink and drive versus don't drink and drive. What are the chances? But then the person who doesn't drink and drive ends up being hit by the person who does drink and drive. And they die, or they're sorely injured or something like that. I think it's one of the most important messages of Ecclesiastes, that there is no magic path in life that's going to allow you to avoid the difficulties and the pitfalls and the pains. Every person gets both good times and bad times. There's chapter 3 hammers on that. There's a time for everything under the sun. Time to be born, time to die. Good stuff, not seemingly good stuff, right? All of that. It goes on down the list. Time for war and a time for peace. But we just want the one side of the list. It's both sides. Every person will get both good times and bad times. There is no escaping it. There are seasons in life, he argues. And so while Ecclesiastes doesn't explicitly say why things have to be this way, it seems that the logic is pretty clear as it's being brought out. If there's a way that you could live so as to avoid all of the pain and all of the hardship, would you ever want to leave here then? Would you ever want to not be in this world anymore? if you could crack that code, if you could find a way to beat the game of life in its hardships, we wouldn't want to be anywhere else. God, however, has given every life its measure of difficulty to remind us all that our true home is not here. Our true home is with God, where things that are bent are made straight, where justice is met out. But really, how we tackle the goods and the bads, the rights and the wrongs of this life, and how we face them, either with God's grace as our strength or in weakness, setting God to the side and choosing the world's way, our own self-serving way, makes all the difference. And so that's part of why this life is this way. It is a testing ground, and to show people what faith and trust in God really looks like, living by the love and the goodness of God. That's where Ecclesiastes 12 comes in. So he says, so this is really the conclusion of this whole matter of seeking things out in life, happiness in life. When all has been heard, what's the point of life? This is it. Fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So what is your pursuit? Is it trying to avoid the effects of a broken and fallen world? Or is it trying to wade through it all by seeking God? Just like we saw from the psalmist this morning. He's facing things and he says, but God, your way, your will in my life, that's the way. That's the only way to live. It's the only way to be. And it's what carries me through it all, whether it's up or down. So there you go. Hopefully that's helpful for you in understanding some things from that text. We're going to sing a song now. And number 294 that Walt has selected for us. 294, I Must Tell Jesus. Okay, let's stand and sing.
I must tell Jesus all my trials. I cannot bear these burdens alone. In my distress, He kindly will help me. He ever loves and cares for His own. I must tell Jesus. I must tell Jesus. I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus. Jesus can help me, Jesus alone. I must tell Jesus all of my troubles. He is a kind, compassionate friend. If I but ask Him, He will deliver. Make of my troubles quickly an end. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, Jesus can help me, Jesus alone. Tempted and tried, I need a great Savior, one who can help my burdens to bear. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, He all my cares and sorrows will share. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, Jesus can help me, Jesus alone. Oh, what a world to evil allures me. Oh, how my heart is tempted to sin. I must tell Jesus, and He will help me over the world the victory to win. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, over the world the victory to win. All right. Danny, you can never have enough readers. You can never run out of condiments. I believe in redundancy.
Thanks, Dan.